is now my honor to introduce our extraordinary keynote speaker, Majora Carter. Majora Carter is a leading urban revitalization strategy consultant, real estate developer, and Peabody Award-winning broadcaster. She is responsible for the creation and implementation of numerous green infrastructure projects, policies, and job training and placement systems. At Sustainable South Bronx, Ms. Carter deployed MIT's first ever mobile digital fabrication laboratory to the South Bronx, where it served as an early iteration of the maker spaces found elsewhere today. The project drew residents and visitors together for guided and creative collaborations. After establishing Sustainable South Bronx and Green for All, among other organizations, to carry on that work, she opened a private consulting firm to help spread the message and success of social enterprise and economic development in low-status communities, which was named Best for the World by B Corp. Clients include industry leaders in many fields, municipal and federal government agencies, and leading educational institutions across the U.S. Please join me in welcoming Majora Carter. Another one of those absences.
I know, exactly. I can't help it. Thank you. Hello. How are you guys doing? Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be in Iowa today. Actually, this is part of I've seen more of Iowa today and tomorrow as well than I've ever seen in my life, and it's a really cool state. So thank you. Beautiful people. So, what's exciting today, and to be at this conference in particular, it's got one of my favorite words in it, which is sustainable. However, we know that when it gets right down to it, if you're not in rooms like this, people have no idea what that means, right? For the most part. Seriously, it's like we've already drank the Kool-Aid. Like, we love this stuff. But normal people, it's kind of like, okay, it's only maybe it's climate change, maybe it's, changing out light bulbs, it's all sorts of things. But I like to think about how to broaden the idea of sustainability so that people don't scratch their heads. They just know it when they feel it, or when they see it, when they experience it. And the way that I like to talk about it more is that there's a bunch of things that I've done and been known for, but ultimately they've all come down to taking an idea and then figuring out a way to turn it into a reality, and putting meat on the bones of a vision that somebody has for how to make a better community. And that's really what I've been doing. And it's been really interesting over these years because folks are like, wow, that's really interesting work, but I feel like I don't even know how to get started. And so what I'm about to show you right now is literally the tool that I use for pretty much every project that I've ever done. And that it's the kind of tool that actually I teach my clients as well, which is all about how to get something from an idea to reality. And it hopefully it might seem a little familiar because literally it's the same kind of thing as if you're an entrepreneur and you've got a product or a service you want to sell. That's really all that it is with any kind of idea and when you want to get it out into the world. And it serves whether you're a policymaker and you've got something that needs to be a product policy that you want to share with your constituents, or if you've got a business idea to sell, if you're a student and you've got a project you want to get help with, it's the same exact process. So literally this is the first thing that we do. First, you have to identify your market or your policy need. Understand that it actually is something that has to happen. And then you have to design an attractive solution for that particular market or policy need. And then you have to obtain angel investment because you do have to build it. And I put angel in quotes because, yes, angel investors are usually it's money, but sometimes it's influence. People who are influenced by what you're doing and then can talk about it. And that can actually mean more than money in a few circles. And then you actually have to do something. Once you have a great idea that you know is going to meet a particular need, you get the angel investment, people who are interested in seeing it happen, and then you have to launch something. You don't just think about your idea and no one sees it, so therefore it really doesn't exist. So you got to put something out there. But once you do something with that project and actually build your beta version, you don't just sit back and just marvel at your creation. You actually have to watch how people use it, how they respond to it. And that in and of itself can be really hard because you'll learn things that you may not want to know. But it gives you an idea of like what you need to do next. And that's when you can reiterate and expand, and only then. So the process is the same if you're, I'll show you're building a business or, you're building a policy. And it's the same, or selling a hairdryer. It goes through the same exact list. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how I've used it in my own work. One, I think a really good way it was done, and then another one where I didn't even follow my own advice. So the first one, so these are different types of water treatment facilities. And so what is the market need that was happening here? In many cities, especially the idea of stormwater and water management becomes very expensive, sometimes inefficient, costs a lot, and these are single-use kind of places as well. So one of the needs that come out often is like, how do we manage stormwater effectively, efficiently, and cost-effectively as well? And especially, so the idea was like, well, maybe we should consider green roofs, and how do we create a plan to actually have this happen all across New York City? Because we know the benefits of them. We know that vegetated surfaces are much cooler, that they don't add to urban heat island effects, that they can attract stormwater, so that's another great thing. So we know all the benefits of why this is important. So our beta version was actually a small project that was funded through our Bronx Borough President's Office and a local utility, because they wanted to support us to see if we could actually build a very community-focused and accessible green and cool roof demonstration. So it was actually up on the rooftop of the building that my office was on, and it was really kind of great. It was an opportunity to think about how do we make this kind of thing happen. And this is almost quaint, to see green roofs looking like this. This was 13 years ago, when they were making green roofs in like little pans, mind you, and that were grown beforehand and done like this. But anyway, we were able to get this group to come up and help us do this, and it really was fantastic, because we were able to then say to folks like, come and see what this looks like. We're measuring the amount of water that it retains from storms. We're showing the impact of what this kind of stuff can do. So it was great. But having it was not enough. What we realized that we had to do was think more about, if we are seriously interested in seeing the utilization of green roofs happen around the city, then there's got to be more to it. But again, building this little beta version was able to help us make more of it happen. So in addition to working to and actually starting more than 50 members of people from diverse groups, as real estate developers down to faith-based groups, who saw the benefit of managing New York City stormwater better, we were able to get them together and literally help create a piece of legislation that was passed within 1 year, in order that they created a $4.50 per square foot tax abatement for green roof installations. And so part of the reason why we did all this was to show, oops, something just happened there. Oh, there we go. To show that yes, these things happen. They attract wildlife. They do all that kind of good stuff, but they actually could create jobs. And that's what we were able to learn from it. And before, in advance of even having that legislation pass, my organization started a green roof installation program called Smart Roofs, where we actually took folks that went through our green jobs training and placement system, hired them to do this work. And I was actually the first paying customer for this to happen, and this was them installing it literally on top of our roof to make sure that people understood that this could in fact happen. And now, this day, that green roof installation tax abatement program has not only created more jobs in the green roof industry, but it's also been used to actually support the development of different types of urban of urban farms that are literally doing small work, and able to now grow food for the city in a reasonable way. So it's really kind of exciting that this is happening. And this is actually a real live Google map, but now we're even able to say, hope that sooner this is what that green roof installation sales tax abatement might actually be able to do. So businesses were actually built as a result of that kind of program as well. So we're pretty excited about that. Now this is an example of how I didn't follow my own advice. So again, identifying a market need, super important. When we think about food, in the States, how many miles does it take for your food to get from the farm to your plate? A lot in many different cases. And we also know, because of the way that farm policy now works, it's easier and cheaper to get really crappy food, which has an impact obviously on the quality of the food that many people, especially in low status communities, I think. So I was also thinking, how cool would it be? And again, a market need, jobs in low status communities, opportunities for healthier food options that are readily accessible for them. And we thought creating jobs using urban agriculture as a way to create new ways to grow food that could then be sold, in urban areas, but also provide jobs, in making that happen. And so I was super excited about this, and I just knew growing, food, in these type of small ways, in these, urban agriculture that we would build and design in low status communities, that would be a great thing to do. And we kind of really got ahead of ourselves through the miracle of Photoshop. We designed to plaster, images of like these guys, with the name of the product that we were planning on using, Root for New York or Root for Detroit, whatever the heck it was. And we were super excited about it. But, in like us being very romanticized, into the idea of urban agriculture, we didn't quite realize that there wasn't anybody willing to invest in it in this way. And we just kept plugging away, thinking, it can't be us, but we realized finally that the approach that we were trying to take, you were never really going to create the kind of jobs that really would have amounted to creating the job creation models of our dreams. You would have been able to do it, but again, we wouldn't have been able to create the jobs. The upfront capital was very expensive unless you literally had the rooftops on top of the building in the grocery store that you were selling it in. And really the money was actually in food manufacturing, so actually adding value to food that was already grown and actually creating linkages between upstate farmers and downstate New York City. That would have been the smarter thing to do. But again, like I said, sometimes I don't even follow my own advice, and ultimately that's what we got. So that, again, this was an example of what not to do. But again, I got stuck at one moment and forgot that I couldn't be the only angel involved in that thing, so it didn't work. But another thing, but anyway, all that to say, the approach that we use, this idea to reality framework, really is about these are problems that we wanted to solve, and then showing you how we approach them, using that framework that we did. So now, when we're thinking about what are the problems or do we want to solve? And in my own practice, in my company, being a member of a community, a citizen of the world, what are things that I would like to use my talents in order to help support? And when I think about it, it's like, what is going on in our communities? And it's interesting because these pictures are ones that have all been taken within just a few blocks from my house in the South Bronx. But frankly, you can see them in all sorts of places around. And so they're the kind of places where you can't find really good, healthy, quality food. The kind of economic developments that are there aren't the kind of things that make people, if they have other places to go, they will go. They're not well known for the kind of quality that they have, and people see and feel that. And again, I love myself a 99-cent store, but after a while, it's kind of like if you have 4 in a 3-square-block radius, you kind of go, is there something else that we can be doing in a place like this? And I do also think that, when you see, lots of things that are allowing people to self-medicate, again, in close proximity, whether it's pharmacies or liquor stores or even some of the more illegal stuff that's out there, it makes you wonder, is there something... there's got to be other stuff within our own communities that make us want to be in them. And again, another thing that I've also seen in low status communities, places where you're not given many opportunities to go to a bank or a credit union and actually work to build your own financial profile, but you'll find tons of check cashing stores. You'll find plenty payday loan centers. You'll even find rent-a centers, which are actually, I'm glad to say, are not as bad as I thought they all were. But still, these are not ways that help you build your credit, in any real way. It's all about, spending. And I actually think that there are taxes on being poor people and living in neighborhoods like that. And definitely another thing you'll find in low-status communities, very high amounts of highly subsidized affordable housing. That it's been done, to provide developers opportunities to go and build in these places, like low opportunity areas, or as they're sometimes called. And what was interesting to me is, as I was this was again my neighborhood. Actually, this particular property is actually in Chicago. It no longer exists. It was called Cabrini Green, which is one of the most notorious housing projects, which doesn't exist anymore right now. But as I was thinking about the ideas around what do I see, or rather the reality of what I see in communities like the South Bronx, traditionally low status communities, and looking at and then traveling around the country and seeing the same things, and granted they may look different if it's a low status white community versus a low status Black and Latino community, but ultimately the same kind of things happen in them. These kind of things are almost markers of poverty level economics, as we call it. And I realize that in low status communities there are really only two kinds of developments. They're the kinds that just say, look, this is what it means to be a poor neighborhood, and that's what it's going to be. Or, on the other hand, they get gentrified, straight up. And it was seeing that and realizing that there's got to be another way, something in the middle that actually allows for communities, low-status communities, to actually not just be just these poor places that when your young kids are born in them, the ones that show any promise are told that they need to measure success by how far they get away from them. Because I was one of those kids, I was literally, from the time I was really little, I was told I was pretty smart, and I believed it, and that I was going to grow up and be somebody, and I believed that too. And I knew that I wasn't going to do that if I stayed in my neighborhood. So education was my path out. And so, but when we do that in the communities like ours, what we are essentially saying is that, we are exacerbating brain drain. People like to think that it only happens in the developing world. It happens in America's low-status communities all the time, and I don't care what color they are. And it was how do we, since we know these are some of the problems that exist in our community, how do we address them? How do we prove out a model that we don't have to move out of our neighborhoods to live in a better one? How do we create and models for way for people to feel as though they can and should reinvest in their own communities, not just with their money. Let's just say they do get education and then grow up and actually get decent jobs. Why wouldn't they want to invest in their own communities? Why? Because we've been told that our communities have no value, which makes it easier for someone else to come in from the outside, see the value, and you buy, and then you sell cheap. And that's generally what happens. And that, I think, are the roots of gentrification. When we see no value in our communities, we sell early and cheap so that someone else can actually reap the benefits of developing communities in a way that actually meets their goals, as opposed to doing the kind of development that actually is by us and for us, or self-gentrification, as I like to call that. So with that, these are some of the things that we see literally happening. And I know that this is not just happening in our communities, but these are literally some of the notes and letters that have been sent to my house, because I own my own property, and asking me to sell my house for cash, and that they could, and literally they've called my home, and actually, and at first I'm like, no, I'm not selling you anything. But then I was like, I need to do a little bit of research. And right away, these people sight unseen were willing to offer me money for my house. Nice chunks of change, but it's just it would be completely oppositional to what we're trying to do in building our community. But trying to help people understand that first we have to retain the value and build generational wealth, in part by owning the land that's in it, which is ours to sell, is a really kind of hard thing to show people when they've been told from their earliest days that this neighborhood is awful, and that you should do whatever you can to get out of it. And that's why we're easing pickings. So what we're trying to do, so we thought, how do we create new models in our own communities that make people see value in it? So whether it's the land that they have that they're sitting on, the properties that they own, or even the kind of businesses that they want to see being built in the community, how do we do this? We did hundreds of surveys to ask people, and we realized that many folks were just like, I don't want to stay in this neighborhood because it doesn't have the kind of things that I know I could find in other neighborhoods. So even though, and others were just like, I would stay here if we had X, Y, Z. And again, hundreds of surveys we did. And some of the folks that went through that survey process that we interviewed, these were some of the people sitting at this table. And this was at an event that we did because we had this thing where we would ask people for their feedback. And those of them who really just gave us the information. And then we were like, if you'd like to talk more, would you? And so we assembled this group of people. And all we did it at first for was to just get intel about and feedback about kind of some of the projects that we wanted to do, because we were like, we want to make sure that this is making sense to the local community. Are these the kind of projects that would make sense and that you want? And you let us know. And so some of these people just kept hanging around. Like we would host them for dinner just as a focus group, and they just stayed because they were like, yeah, I really appreciate that somebody's listening to what I have to say and actually using that kind of information. And so thus they were the Hunts Point Advisory Board. And now, so even though they do, we use them specifically to give us feedback on our work to make sure that it's working, but also they do their own projects as well. That's why they're wearing their own uniform and the little red shirts, which is kind of cute. But these are the things that they all came up with. Like, these are some of the markers of what's a great community. Being able to have a place where a community can gather in ways that make them feel good about themselves. So not just, I find that, especially when developers are building in low status communities, the thing that they'll do, it's like, oh, and we've got room for a community center. I have never, ever, ever met someone from a low status community who was able to move out of that community to go to another community that only had community centers. They go to places that have bars and restaurants and bookstores and cool things, not community centers. So, and if that's where they think that that's all where poor folks want to gather, because that's what they've been told. I don't know where they get that. But anywho, also, they want beautiful, high-quality things. They want things that are beautiful. So they're just, and they know that those things are missing. They want things that produce jobs. They know that there's a big economic development world out there that bypasses their communities. Thus, the sort of low-grade shops that we have, tons of 99-cent stores, and it's just like, okay, how many more of these kind of things do we need? Many of them saw their kids leaving. Many of them were young and wanted to leave. And we're just like, is there a way to make me want to stay? Because there's other things in this community that I do want to be around. Like, I love my family. Like, we do have some really cool parks now. There's a bunch of things going on, but guess what? It's not enough. I need more to make it a real community. And again, that wants community, but not in that community center kind of feeling thing that just reads like poverty. And it feels good. So what we were able to do was, and my role as a developer was able, and to finance, some things at least, was we opened it up a little coffee shop. And, we had a great partner who was actually a major roaster and coffee shop owner within the city, and we were able to partner with them in order to do this work. And because even we wanted to build the community, they wanted to sell coffee, and together we actually had a great marriage. But what we realized is that sooner we needed to sort of like spread our wings a little bit, and back in January, we actually acquired the full interest in the coffee shop and created this amazing sense of community. So now we've got like different kinds of art on the wall. We created, hip-hop inspired, food offerings. It's like the Big Pun panini and stuff like that, for those of you who know hip-hop, but that's okay. Anyway, the people in my neighborhood do, so it's all sorts of fun. So it's really awesome, to have been able to build that kind of love and within the four walls of this tiny little space. And now as far as we know, it is the only locally owned specialty coffee shop that's owned by two women of color, within the Bronx. And that's like a really pretty big deal, for that to happen right now. And we're super excited about all that. Yeah, thank you. On the jobs front, part of what people wanted to address was just like they knew technology was a big thing, but they didn't exactly know how it was working, and especially how it was working in our community, which it wasn't. And so, and what we often hear about the digital divide is that it's all about people's access to the internet. And you know what? Through smartphones, most of the world at this point has it. Not everybody, but most of it. So the digital divide is not about having access to the internet. It's literally about, are you simply a consumer of technology, or are you also producing it? And unfortunately, even here, where we know that, people of color in particular, very digitally, tech savvy, native, the whole shebang, if there's a real phrase for it. And it's just, so that's not the issue. I feel like kids come out of the womb like knowing how to use a smart screen. It's sort of creepy, but that's what it is. But what we do know is that American tech diversity has not kept up with American diversity, which we know America will no longer be majority white probably by the 2040s, but tech diversity has pretty much stayed exactly where it's been. So we know, and we hear it all the time, it's like everybody's trying to teach kids to code. It's like we need more diversity in technology because guess what? Much of the world is going to be of color, especially this country. So we've got to figure out ways that they were using technology to meet the different needs of all sorts of people out there, and all that's said and true. And so what we were interested in trying to think about was how do we ensure that folks from low status communities can participate fully in the tech economy, and not just as consumers, but also as producers. And so we had to find a way. And so the idea was we started in the South Bronx, but our goal was to really address the types of talent, tech talent that exists in the Bronx, which we really did think it was going to skew toward folks that hadn't graduated from high school, might have maybe had some employment, but were generally pretty underemployed. But what we were shocked about was how many folks that actually had BAs in computer science and even engineering that were just not working in the technology field, and that were, I think, victims and casualties of statistical hiring bias in tech. And when we looked at some of that, we were just like, why are these people applying for entry-level jobs with us? Because we realized, guess what, there is that bias. But again, I don't think that it's often because, and only because, there are folks who just don't want, people of color or white women working in technology, even though I do think there are some really racist, sexist people in the tech industry. There's also those who I think you know who you know. And you know who you're comfortable with, and if you're not working, with a diverse group of people, yeah, if you're a white guy, you're going to hire the white guy. That's generally how it works. But so that's why, as we started thinking about, well, if knowing that, how do we impact this tech talent diversity issue in a way that actually makes sense to everybody and doesn't make the white guy on the hiring side feel like weird because kids of color are walking into the room. It's just like that's not going to help anybody, and it is weird. So how about we look for a market-based approach to dealing with this? And one of the things that we did was we identified just the software development pipeline and discovered that there was a piece of it that was generally offshored, but there was a whole group of folks within the software development universe that weren't happy with the offshored options that they had. And in particular, that was in this thing called quality assurance. And quality assurance is basically testing. And so it's like, think of it as if you're a writer, you've got an editor to look at your stuff and make sure that it works, that it reads properly for your audience. A quality assurance analyst does the exact same things for a developer who does a piece of software. Just make sure it works and tries to break it and make sure that it doesn't, that it works the way it's supposed to, and figures out how it could fail so that it can be fixed before it goes to market. And so, and many folks within software types like gaming or websites with lots of moving parts, all sorts of stuff like that, heavy user interfaces, that kind of stuff, it had to be tested, and they weren't happy with sending it to India or China or to Eastern Europe, where there was time zones away and there was a language barrier. So a Western audience, one that was a subway ride away, who literally could be in the sprint meetings with them, that was something real to them. And then we realized, let's see if this actually works. So again, going along the lines of this like market and policy need kind of thing, we had to try it out. So we knew there was a need. We knew there was the tech sector diversity, and we knew that potential clients would want a service that actually worked for them. So we designed this alternative that was literally, we were going to be a B2B service for people that needed quality assurance in the industry. So we literally created this model and then gave it away in 2 different pilots, one for Nickelodeon, a huge game company, and Trescenza, which is a little one. And so we trained up people to do the work, and then we literally had them give us their work, stuff that they'd already done, just so that they could see how well we did it. And they were amazed at how well everything turned out. And that was our beta test. I was the angel because I paid for it, but the beta was just like giving it to these folks and seeing if they liked it, and they did, and so did our team members because they got paid. It was like, it's fun to be an angel. But anyway, what was really great was that we discovered this project actually allowed happiness on both sides. Our team members got paid, our clients had a solution that they wanted, and that's when we realized, oh my goodness, we could actually create more with this. And this is just this nice slide to just show that there's like billions of dollars in the actual industry worldwide. So that was our beta, and then we decided to expand it into a real office. And so that became, we actually took up space, on a corner spot that had been closed and abandoned for years. It was actually, when the neighborhood was like really bad, that was like a really super hot corner. Now we opened it up the gates, polished up the windows, and then put nice funky exposed brick and paintings all over the place. And then this became the place that was our tech talent pipeline in this space, so that people could look through the windows and literally see black and brown people that look just like them doing technology. So they might not have known exactly what being a QA analyst was until we explained it to them, but they were proud and happy of the fact that there were people doing technology in their own communities. And we also, the way we recruited was by doing gaming tournaments to get people into the community, into the space, and that was like our first screen to see if people could work well together as well. And then after that, this whole space, it was just like the buzz of the neighborhood. And what was really cool was that we used that little space to also build bridges in places where they didn't really exist before. This photo was taken actually close after the Eric Garner non-verdict, famous police brutality case in New York. And when the officer was released, not charged, however it happened, it was bad in New York. People were not happy, and including, in our community. So as a way, in our precinct, and I love them for this, we're just like, how are we going to show that actually we're a part of this community? And so we partnered with them and actually did a Call of Duty gaming tournament between cops and community as a way to get people in the same room. I know, and for those of you that aren't gamers, Call of Duty is actually one of those really violent video games that people really like to play. And yes, they are shooting each other, but they're doing it virtually. But this, which especially now, I'd prefer that. But what this did, because we had no idea how many grown cops really liked playing Call of Duty. It was really interesting. But they showed up and they stayed until 1 o'clock in the morning. And the thing that I am the most proud of is that, I know we can't claim full credit for this, but we will claim some, is that our precinct was the only one at that time that did not show increases in police and community hostility toward each other. So that's saying something. And the plan is to build this out, across the country as possible. Another thing is, as we think about how do we build communities, spaces like this was actually a former rail station that it closed the rail service for many, many years, and it was then split into like a little mini strip mall. When the owner died, Amtrak was like, we're not playing landlord, we're kicking you all out. And I got really upset because that is literally the gateway into the community. And I thought, we can't just have this spot look like that. And so I actually figured out a way to acquire it. Had some young people, and it took me 3 years to do it, mind you. But had some young people just paint it over just to make it look like a little more inviting than it had been. And then use the same exact approach with building an attractive third space. Because again, people were saying they needed more wonderful third spaces, because right now we don't have any. And the angel investment came in the form of first me acquiring the space, and then later on acquiring a partner with the financing, so that we're actually going to build that out into a really cool family-friendly dining option, which we have not had in our community in God knows how long. And last but definitely not least, this is more of an aspirational kind of where we'd like to go. This is actually a real place. It's the former Spofford Juvenile Detention Facility. This is where all of the juvenile offenders in New York City went to up until like 2005. And it was a horrible place. It is was one of the worst, and like the kind of things that you'd hear about how badly juvenile offenders were treated in places. This is what it was. My father actually, when in the 70s, was a janitor there, and I remember him specifically being like, I wish we could take in more kids. And I was one of those houses where my family did take in kids and take care of them, and because I wish we could take in more kids, because that place just breaks people. It just breaks children, and it did. But finally, in 2011, it was shut down, and that's when I was able to convince the city to consider transforming that big 5-acre boogeyman of a site into something that could accommodate mixed-income housing and mixed-use commercial development. Because we know that concentrating poverty just continues to concentrate all of the bad health outcomes, the low educational outcomes. We think hostility between communities, it does all those bad things. So creating more mixed income housing was the important thing to do. And so creating mixed income housing, looking at what the economic trends are, and discovering that we could, in fact, create 21st century, manufacturing, and know that it's out there. Really good quality public space, because public space, when it's done well, is the great democratizer. You don't need money when it's done well, but it does, I believe, have an incredible, beautiful effect on folks. Actually, I'm sorry Phil Rodbell isn't here, because he was one of the first people that I heard talk about some of the effects of green infrastructure and how it had such an incredible positive impact on people's lives when done well. Commercial and retail, and just having places to spend your money in your own community makes you feel like this is someplace to stay. And so the next thing that we did was, what I loved about that particular site, and when we, as traveling around the country, realized that where it was and how it was situated actually mirrored a lot of places in post-industrial American cities. The orange part is the residential area, and the blue part is the manufacturing or industrial part. And there's always something in the middle in the site that we call the hinge area. That's where that little circle is, but also that's where Spofford is, because that's where those two areas butt up against each other and nothing really happens. And here in this particular area, jail on one side, the other side, a truck engine rebuilding spot, some empty garages. And basically, it was what the neighborhood knew it to me, since it was such a lonely place where not much happened. That was where truckers went to go pick up a prostitute. And that's what would happen. But imagine what would happen if by chance you activated the ground plane in the kind of way that created more opportunities for people to enjoy it economically and socially. Like, imagine farmers markets there, or shops that are open, or a bar that's open. Those type of things could be really kind of cool. And the idea for us was not to just redevelop it in this way, just so that it could be like this one little nice diamond, sitting in this like awfulness, but that you could raise the bar for what passed for decent and healthy mixed income housing and mixed use commercial development. And so my team, when the city decided to finally, put it out to bid, assembled this amazing team, this incredibly diverse team of some of the best real estate developers. Habitat for Humanity was a part of our team, and they wanted to build 100 units of low income home ownership, which would have been the largest development in the country. At that point, we had 1,200 units of mixed income housing, really beautifully integrated housing for kids aging out of foster care, as well as good market rate housing as well, for middle class folks that would normally have to leave the neighborhood to live there. 200,000 square feet of commercial and light industrial cultural space that would have, and of course retail and stuff, that would have allowed for actually more than 800 jobs, permanent jobs, not the construction, permanent jobs, to be on this 5-acre site. And we were so excited, and we frankly knew we had the best proposal, but our city decided instead to actually award it to two developers that were planning on building 100% very, very low income housing project with a health center and a community center. That's why I still got it to be a developer. So with all that to say, but again, this is the kind of stuff that we're working on. But going through that process made me realize more, and believe me, folks in the community were not happy that that opportunity just slipped through their fingers once again. But that's okay, because we're still working on other stuff. But the idea now is to know that being impatient about the kind of communities that we want to live in, building the type of making it people understand that sustainability is something that is a part of something that belongs to them, that should be theirs by every stretch of not just every stretch of the imagination, but that is something that we can afford to be a part of. Again, we looked at all of these things as problems to solve, and these were the approaches that we took to help make them happen. And the kind of things that I'm always excited to help other folks, not just in my own hometown do, but all over the country. But thinking about that, and just knowing that it is possible. And so I'm really excited to be a part of this gathering that you created, because it's really always good to be around very like-minded people who are trying to make the world a better place where they are, and to know that you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. And so I thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.